Entitled suburban mom Karen Matthews storms into small claims court, demanding a full jury trial over a measly $200 fender bender. But what she doesn't know is that Judge Judy has been waiting 25 years for someone exactly like her. In the most brutal courtroom takedown ever captured on camera, Judge Judy doesn't just deny Karen's ridiculous demands, she obliterates her entire worldview, exposes her darkest secrets, and leaves her sobbing in front of millions. The aftermath? Karen's life implodes in ways she never saw coming. Watch the moment that destroyed an entitled woman's reputation forever. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning at the downtown small claims courthouse. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that familiar harsh glow across worn wooden benches. Court clerks shuffled paperwork with practiced efficiency, their voices echoing off marble walls that had witnessed decades of petty disputes. Outside, morning commuters rushed past, completely unaware that inside these walls a moment of pure justice was about to unfold. A moment that would make headlines, break the internet, and restore faith in the American legal system. Karen Matthews sat in the front row, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her designer handbag. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair styled in that signature suburban mom bob that screamed entitlement from a mile away. Her lips, painted in an aggressive shade of coral, were pressed into a thin line of disgust as she surveyed the courthouse around her. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. And she was about to make damn sure everyone knew it. But what Karen didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that sitting behind the judge's bench was a woman who had built her entire career on destroying people exactly like her. Judge Judy Shindlin had presided over thousands of cases, dealt with every type of entitled plaintiff imaginable. But something about Karen's case file had caught her attention. Something that made her cancel her afternoon appointments and clear her entire schedule, because Judge Judy had done her homework. And what she'd discovered about Karen Matthews was about to turn this routine hearing into a masterclass in humiliation. The bailiff called the court to order, his voice cutting through the morning chatter like a knife. Karen stood up, adjusting her suit jacket with an air of superiority that made several spectators exchange knowing glances. She had that look, the look of someone who had never been told no in her entire privileged life. The look of someone who believed rules were for other people. The look of someone who was about to learn the hardest lesson of her existence. As Karen approached the plaintiff's table, she pulled out a thick manila folder stuffed with what appeared to be legal documents. But these weren't ordinary small claims paperwork. These were demands, constitutional arguments, threats of appeals, a complete misunderstanding of how the legal system actually worked, wrapped up in the arrogance of someone who watched too many legal dramas and thought she understood the law. The defendant, a working-class mechanic named Miguel Rodriguez, sat quietly at his table, still wearing his work uniform from the night shift. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Here was a man who worked with his hands, who earned every dollar through honest labor, facing off against a woman who had never worked a real day in her life. Miguel's case was simple. Karen had rear-ended his truck in a parking lot, caused $200 in damage, and was now trying to claim he was somehow at fault. But Karen had other plans. Plans that would shock the courtroom and set the stage for the most savage judicial beatdown in legal history. If you love seeing entitled people get the reality check they desperately deserve, smash that like button right now because you're about to witness the most satisfying courtroom destruction you've ever seen. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Judge Judy discovers Karen's hidden secrets. Karen Matthews wasn't just any entitled suburban mom. She was the wife of a prominent real estate developer, the queen bee of her gated community's homeowner association, and a woman who had spent the last 15 years wielding her husband's money like a weapon against anyone who dared cross her path. Her 3-story McMansion sat on the most expensive street in Westfield Heights, complete with a circular driveway where her white BMW X7 gleamed like a trophy of her superiority. She had never lost an argument with a store manager, never been denied a refund, and certainly never been told that her demands were unreasonable. The incident that brought her to court was laughably trivial, even by small claims standards. 3 weeks earlier, Karen had been texting while backing out of a Whole Foods parking space when she bumped into Miguel's work truck. The damage was minimal, a small dent and scratched paint that any reasonable person would have handled through insurance. But Karen Matthews wasn't reasonable. She was furious that Miguel had the audacity to park his ugly work vehicle next to her luxury SUV in the first place. What started as a simple fender bender quickly escalated when Karen began screaming at Miguel in the parking lot, demanding to know why someone like him was shopping at her grocery store. She called the police, claiming he had intentionally positioned his truck to damage her car. When the responding officer politely explained that the evidence clearly showed she was at fault, Karen demanded to speak to his supervisor. Then the supervisor then threatened to call the mayor, who she claimed was a personal friend. Miguel, a hard-working father of two who had been pulling double shifts to save for his daughter's college fund, simply wanted his truck repaired so he could continue working. But Karen had other plans. She hired a lawyer, filed a countersuit claiming emotional distress, and began a campaign of harassment that included calling Miguel's employer and trying to get him fired. When her lawyer quietly advised her to settle and warned that her case was frivolous, Karen fired him and decided to represent herself. But that wasn't the worst part. In her twisted mind, Karen had convinced herself that this case was about more than money. It was about principle. It was about showing people like Miguel their place in the social hierarchy. It was about using the legal system to prove that her word mattered more than the truth. The manila folder she clutched contained her masterpiece of legal ignorance. Karen had spent weeks researching constitutional law, convinced that she had discovered loopholes that would force the court to grant her demands. She had printed out articles about jury trials, constitutional amendments, and legal precedents that she completely misunderstood. In her mind, she was about to school everyone in that courtroom about how the law really worked. As the court clerk called the case, Karen stood with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. She had practiced her opening statement in front of her bathroom mirror for hours, perfecting the tone of righteous indignation that had served her so well in PTA meetings and country club disputes. She was ready to demand not just a jury trial, but a change of venue, a court-appointed attorney, and compensation for her time and suffering. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy had received an unusual phone call the night before. Miguel's previous lawyer, the one Karen had forced him to fire through her harassment campaign, had contacted the court with some disturbing information about Karen's behavior. There were recordings of threatening voicemails, evidence of attempted witness intimidation, and a pattern of abuse that went far beyond this simple parking lot incident. Judge Judy had also done some research of her own. A few phone calls to colleagues in the family court system revealed that Karen was no stranger to legal proceedings. There were restraining orders filed by former neighbors, complaints from service workers, and a lengthy history of using litigation as a tool of intimidation. This wasn't Karen's first time trying to destroy someone's life over a minor inconvenience. It was a pattern. As Karen approached the podium, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of approaching doom, she had no idea that she wasn't just facing a judge. She was facing a woman who had spent a quarter-century dealing with bullies, who had built her reputation on protecting the innocent from predators, and who was about to use every tool at her disposal to make sure Karen Matthews never terrorized another working person again. The courtroom fell silent as Karen cleared her throat, preparing to deliver what she believed would be a brilliant legal argument. But Judge Judy was already 3 steps ahead, her fingers drumming quietly against her desk as she prepared to unleash 25 years of judicial fury on the most deserving target she had encountered in years. Karen stepped to the podium with the swagger of someone who believed she was about to make legal history. She opened her manila folder with theatrical precision, pulling out a stack of papers that she had organized with color-coded tabs and sticky notes. The courtroom spectators, mostly there for other cases, began to sense that something unusual was about to unfold. "Your Honor," Karen began, her voice dripping with the condescension she typically reserved for retail workers and restaurant servers. "Before we proceed with this trivial matter, I must invoke my constitutional right to a trial by jury. The Sixth Amendment clearly states that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury." Judge Judy's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained stone cold. She had heard thousands of pro se litigants butcher legal concepts before, but Karen's arrogance was already setting her apart from the usual crowd of confused defendants. "Furthermore," Karen continued, gaining confidence from what she mistook as judicial interest, "I demand that this case be transferred to federal court, where my constitutional rights will be properly protected. This small claims proceeding is clearly insufficient for a matter of this magnitude." A few spectators exchanged glances. Even those with no legal training could sense that something was very wrong with Karen's argument. Miguel's jaw dropped as he realized that Karen was about to turn a simple $200 dispute into a federal case. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her fingers steepled in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried the weight of decades of judicial authority. "Ms. Matthews, are you quite finished with your constitutional lecture?" Karen's smile faltered for just a moment before she pressed on. "Your Honor, I've spent considerable time researching the applicable law, and I believe this court lacks jurisdiction to—" "Stop." Judge Judy's single word cut through Karen's speech like a scalpel. The courtroom fell completely silent. Ms. Matthews, before you continue embarrassing yourself further, let me explain something very basic about the legal system that you've apparently failed to grasp despite all your research. Karen's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being interrupted, especially not by someone who was supposed to be serving her interests. Your Honor, with all due respect, I have every right to— You have the right to remain silent, Judge Judy said, her voice rising with the first hint of the storm to come. And given the legal nonsense you've been spewing for the last 2 minutes, I strongly suggest you exercise that right. The spectators were now fully engaged. Sensing that they were about to witness something special, Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in years, someone had not only interrupted her but had done so with such authority that she actually felt small. This is a civil small claims matter, not a criminal prosecution. Judge Judy continued, her voice building momentum. Your Sixth Amendment argument is about as relevant as a chocolate teapot. And your demand for federal jurisdiction tells me that you understand less about the law than my bailiff's goldfish. Karen tried to speak, but Judge Judy raised her hand with the authority of someone who had controlled courtrooms longer than Karen had been manipulating store managers. We're just getting started, Ms. Matthews. And before this day is over, you're going to learn exactly how the law works when you can't buy your way out of consequences. Judge Judy stood up slowly, her black robes flowing like the wings of justice itself. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from mild curiosity to electric anticipation as she began to pace behind her bench, her eyes never leaving Karen's increasingly pale face. Ms. Matthews, let me educate you about small claims court since your expensive research clearly failed you, Judge Judy began, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of judicial experience. Small claims court has a maximum jurisdiction of $5,000. You're here fighting over $200. There are no juries in small claims court. There are no appeals to federal court. There are no constitutional violations. There's just you making a fool of yourself on a Tuesday morning. Karen tried to interrupt, raising her manicured finger. But Your Honor, the principle of the matter— And the principle? Judge Judy's voice rose sharply. Let's talk about principles, shall we? You rear-ended Mr. Rodriguez's truck while texting about your yoga class. The police report clearly states you were at fault. Instead of taking responsibility like an adult, you've spent 3 weeks and probably thousands of dollars trying to destroy a hard-working man's life over pocket change. The spectators were now leaning forward in their seats. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a moral reckoning. But that's not even the worst part. Judge Judy continued, pulling out a file that made Karen's eyes widen with recognition. I've done some research of my own, Ms. Matthews. Would you like to tell the court about Mrs. Henderson? Your 70-year-old neighbor whom you sued for $10,000 because her rose bushes allegedly decreased your property value? Karen's face went white. That's not relevant to this case. Or perhaps you'd like to explain why you filed a restraining order against a teenage pizza delivery driver because he accidentally rang your doorbell twice. Judge Judy's voice was building to a crescendo. Or why 3 different housekeepers have quit your employ and filed complaints with the labor board. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of Karen's rapid breathing. Miguel sat stunned, finally understanding why this woman had made his life hell for 3 weeks. You see, Ms. Matthews, you've turned litigation into a hobby. You use the legal system like a weapon to terrorize anyone who doesn't bow down to your sense of entitlement. But today, that stops. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to respond. Your Honor, those cases were— I was just protecting my right. Protecting your rights? Judge Judy laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean protecting your ability to abuse people who can't afford to fight back? Well, congratulations, Ms. Matthews, you've finally met someone who can. The judge's eyes blazed with righteous fury. You want to know what principles look like? Mr. Rodriguez works 60 hours a week to support his family. He's never sued anyone, never filed a frivolous complaint, never tried to destroy someone's livelihood over hurt feelings. That's principle, Ms. Matthews. What you practice is privilege, wrapped in legal threads. Karen's hands were visibly shaking now as the weight of public humiliation crashed down on her perfectly constructed world. Judge Judy stepped down from her bench, moving closer to Karen with the deliberate pace of someone delivering final judgment. The courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to deliver what would become the most devastating judicial speech ever recorded. You want to know what really disgusts me, Ms. Matthews? Judge Judy's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. It's not your ignorance of the law. It's not even your complete lack of personal responsibility. It's that you've weaponized the very system designed to protect people like Mr. Rodriguez from people like you. Karen's perfectly applied makeup was beginning to run as tears of humiliation mixed with her foundation. She tried to speak, but only a strangled whimper escaped her throat. You sit in your mansion, drive your luxury car, and spend your days finding new ways to torture working families because you're bored, because your life is so empty, so meaningless. That the only way you can feel powerful is by crushing people who actually contribute to society. The words hit Karen like physical blows. For the first time in her privileged life, someone was seeing through her carefully constructed facade and exposing the hollow, bitter person beneath. You called Mr. Rodriguez's truck ugly. You questioned his right to shop at your precious Whole Foods. You tried to get him fired for the crime of existing in your world. Judge Judy's voice rose to a thunderous crescendo. But you know what's truly ugly, Ms. Matthews? Your soul. Karen's legs buckled slightly. A woman in the gallery began to quietly applaud, then another, until the entire courtroom erupted in sustained applause that lasted nearly a minute. Through her tears, Karen whispered, I just wanted, what? Respect? Judge Judy cut her off. Respect is earned through character, through integrity, through treating others with dignity. You've spent 15 years proving you possess none of those qualities. Karen collapsed into her chair, sobbing openly now as years of entitled behavior finally caught up with her. The designer suit, the perfect hair, the arrogant posture, all of it crumbled away, leaving behind a broken woman who had finally met accountability. Judgment for the defendant. Ms. Matthews, you will pay Mr. Rodriguez $200 for damages, plus $500 in court costs for wasting everyone's time with your frivolous demands. And Ms. Matthews? Judge Judy paused as Karen looked up with red, swollen eyes. The next time you think about bullying someone who can't fight back, remember this moment. Remember how it feels to face someone who won't be intimidated by your husband's money or your empty threats. Karen stumbled toward the exit, her dignity in ruins as the courtroom watched the complete destruction of an entitled tyrant. If Judge Judy's epic takedown of this entitled Karen gave you chills, smash that subscribe button and tell us in the comments which part of this demolition was your favorite. This is what real justice looks like. Within hours of Karen's courtroom humiliation, cell phone footage of the confrontation exploded across social media. The hashtags Judge Judy destroys or Karen meets justice and courtroom comeback trended worldwide as millions watched an entitled bully finally face consequences. In her BMW outside the courthouse, Karen sat frozen, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she read the flood of comments celebrating her downfall. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from former friends sharing the video, her country club group chat going silent after someone posted the link. Meanwhile, Miguel drove back to work with tears of relief in his eyes. For 3 weeks he'd lived in fear of losing his job, his reputation destroyed by Karen's vindictive campaign. Now, strangers were calling him a hero for standing up to entitlement. Back in her chambers, Judge Judy quietly reviewed the case file one final time. She'd seen thousands of bullies over the years, but something about Karen's complete breakdown felt different. This wasn't just about $200 anymore. It was about sending a message to every entitled person watching that their behavior had consequences. In suburban coffee shops and factory break rooms across America, people replayed the video, finally seeing someone stand up to the Karens in their own lives. Justice had spoken and the internet was listening. 3 months later, the reverberations of that Tuesday morning confrontation were still being felt across the country. Judge Judy's takedown of Karen Matthews had become more than just a viral video. It had become a cultural moment, a rallying cry for everyone who had ever been bullied by entitled people who thought money could buy them immunity from consequences. In her final interview before retiring, Judge Judy reflected on the case that had defined her legacy. Karen Matthews represented everything wrong with our society, she said, her voice carrying the same authority that had commanded that courtroom. People who use their privilege as a weapon, who mistake wealth for worth, who think they can terrorize others without consequence. But here's what Karen learned that day. Justice doesn't care about your zip code, your car, or your husband's bank account. Justice cares about right and wrong. The impact extended far beyond one entitled woman's public humiliation. Videos of the confrontation were being shown in law schools as examples of judicial authority. Human resources departments used clips to train employees on workplace bullying. Parents showed it to their teenagers as lessons about treating service workers with respect. Karen herself had retreated from public life entirely. Her social media accounts went dark, her country club membership quietly lapsed, and neighbors reported seeing moving trucks at her mansion. The woman who had once terrorized store clerks and delivery drivers had learned that accountability was the one thing money couldn't buy. Miguel Rodriguez, meanwhile, had become an unlikely symbol of dignity in the face of adversity. He never sought fame or attention from the incident, continuing to work his shifts and save for his daughter's education. But when reporters found him, his message was simple. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they drive or where they work. The courthouse where it all happened became something of a pilgrimage site. People would drive hours just to sit in the same gallery where justice had been served so dramatically. The bailiff reported that applicants for small claims cases often specifically requested Judge Judy's courtroom, hoping to witness another moment of accountability. Legal experts called it the Matthews effect, the phenomenon where entitled plaintiffs would suddenly drop frivolous lawsuits rather than risk the kind of public humiliation Karen had endured. Lawyers across the country reported fewer harassment cases as bullies realized that their behavior might end up broadcast to millions. But perhaps the most profound change was in the countless service workers, delivery drivers, and retail employees who found new strength in Karen's public destruction. They stood a little taller when faced with entitled customers, remembering that somewhere out there, a judge had proven that their dignity mattered too. Judge Judy's final words that day had been prophetic. Remember how it feels to face someone who won't be intimidated. And across America, people were remembering. They were standing up. They were refusing to be intimidated. Because sometimes justice doesn't whisper. Sometimes justice roars. This incredible story proves that entitlement always meets its match and accountability never goes out of style. If this video restored your faith in justice, absolutely destroy that like button, hit subscribe for more epic courthouse moments, and join our membership for exclusive content that celebrates real American heroes. Tell us in the comments, what was the most satisfying moment of Karen's total destruction? And remember, when you stand up for what's right, you're never standing alone. Storytime with Justice, where entitled people meet their match and working people get the respect they deserve.